Hello and welcome to another video. So I wanted to do a little video just about the new pre-builts that come out. So we're going to go over each pre-built, their value, what's been changed and why, and basically just give you guys a rundown on why they've gone to an 800 vial count, 800 crystal count for their cost, and to basically one purchase limit on each deck, which I think makes sense to me, but we'll see how we go throughout the video. So let's get into it. First up on the list, obviously, is Forest. Forest deck is, well, it's a Forest deck, I guess. There's a couple of pretty good cards in the current meta with the Cassiopeia and the Elephant, both being really solid cards. Everything else in this deck, I would say, is reasonably average. I mean, Spring Ring Protection seems to be a pretty popular card. Fairy Drive is a pretty popular card, so both those golds have pretty good value, although everything else is pretty average. But overall, I think the deck is still pretty good. The Emperor, why it's a bronze, is still a pretty good deck. They've structured these decks a little nicer than the previous ones, although I don't know if I can entirely agree with the fact that they've put basic cards in this deck. Like, mixing basic cards into the deck feels really bad to me. I don't think that was the right choice for them to make. But the reason they've basically made them a single purchase limit and boosted the cost up to 800 crystals seems to be the fact that, one, they've added more golds and more of those golds. So compared to previous decks, you now have a total of 8 gold cards in this deck alone, and then the 2 legendaries, although they have removed alt art legendaries, which I think was personally a huge mistake, because alt art legendaries were like 90% of the reason to buy the pre-built decks. But I think that's mainly because they want to move away from the whole whaling on these decks, which a lot of people did. They'd buy 3 of one deck and never really try much else because they just wanted this one card. But they do include sleeves in this deck, and I believe the Forest sleeve is Cassiopeia based on the box art. I'm pretty sure that's what comes with it. It is listed in the includes, so you can find that there. But yeah, so 800 cost basically is because they added more golds. They've made the decks a bit better, I would say. They have got sleeves, they did cut alt arts. I think it's balanced out a little bit with how they've done this. The one deck purchase limit, on the other hand, is something that a lot of people have discussed, and I've talked to a few people about it, and they had varying opinions, but for the most part, I would say, personally, I believe the one cost purchase limit is to encourage people to buy other pre-built decks. So if you go in, purchase it, you go, okay, I've got this Forest deck, I want way more of the King Elephant, way more Cassiopeia. Well, to get those, you're going to have to open the packs, which obviously leads them into their whole microtransaction stuff, which is what they want. They want to funnel people into the more randomized stuff, which you could say is both bad and good in different forms. But for a new player, getting one deck and then buying it 3 times like they used to, you would be spending a fair bit more because the costs add up to be a lot more. You do get 3 of each legendary, which might be a good start, but then you find people who are funneled into playing just one craft, which I don't think they want for this game. Cygames wants the game to basically run in a way that everyone can experience every kind of deck and have an equal go with it, without having to worry too much about, oh, this craft is the only one that a lot of people are playing, what are we going to do? Doing this, new players can come in, they can purchase a deck, they can purchase 2 decks, 3 decks, you know, and they'd have multiple different varieties of deck to play. Again, I don't like the idea of adding basics to fill out the decks, but that's a whole separate argument altogether really with these. It's kind of ridiculous. Everything else, though, I think is really good and solid. I can see why they've done it. Of course, not everyone's going to agree, but in a business sense, I think it makes sense. Aiming to have 1 of each legendary while still giving good value to new players, while allowing them to expand without just focusing on one single craft, is a pretty good idea, I think. It does encourage people to spend money a little bit, but I think Shadowverse kinda needs that in some way. A lot of this game, right from the beginning, has always been reasonably free to play. You could go in, play the entire game for free, they'd give out heaps of packs. I mean, on average, I could average 30 free packs a month, easy, at least 1 a day. No problem at all. That doesn't even count my gold game, basically. So That's pretty crazy. Now they're moving a little more to the pay structure, where they want people to buy packs more often, get packs more often, or just grind out the game more, so they can have more playtime. I can see that being bad for the consumer, but as a business, I guess that's how you got to make money, especially on a free-to-play game like this, with such large tournaments they're moving towards, so I think it makes a little sense. So that's just my thoughts and opinions on why they've changed the structure decks, and a quick look at the forest one. Now we'll just go through, look at each one reasonably quickly, and just, you know, basically just take a look at them. So the next pre-built deck is the sword deck. Sword deck is a little interesting. It does have 3 Perseus, 2 Lux Solar, basically that, and the 3 round tables. So again, this one has 8 golds. I believe the last one did have 8 too. I don't know whether I misspoke, it's at 6, but it did have 8. These ones are divvied up slightly differently. I think mainly because they were trying to synergize the round table with things like Juliet and Mars and stuff like that, and Perseus being a super solid 1-drop. So this deck does contain some okay cards. Mars, probably not the best sword card at the moment. Hero of Antiquity is quite popular in mid-range and Roland sword decks, so I can see why that was kind of included, because it is quite a solid card, especially for beginners. Other than that, pretty much everything in this deck is very beginner orientated, but that's pretty much how Swordcraft works. It's a very beginner orientated craft when you're looking at the core of it. It's very straightforward. It uses basic Storm Rush or Follower up, like, stat effects. That's basically it. There is nothing else really crazy in the deck until you really get into the whole control late game kind of combo-y sort of stuff, which even then is still straightforward. So while I don't think this deck in particular is really worth the value, it's still a really solid beginner deck, and for beginners it should be great. Next up, Rune. Rune has probably one of the best value for money decks for their pre-builts right now. Star Reader Stellar is still a great card. Even if it's a bit RNG, I still think it's good, especially as a one-of. So getting one in a pre-built deck is great. The other legendary in this is Wizardess of Oz, which honestly is probably one of the most, I wouldn't say cheat cards, but definitely one of the most crazy spell-orientated cards, and ran in basically every single dirt deck you've probably ever seen. Even used to be ran in some forms of D-shift type decks, where you could just bust your hand out really quickly and then proc D-shift at the end of turn and basically just keep rolling over and over again with low-cost stuff. So it is quite entertaining Oz. I've seen a few hybrid decks go through since Oz, but most popular in Dirt Rune. And this deck is more Dirt Rune orientated, I would say, considering we've got 3 Witch's Cauldron and 3 Starseers, both really good Earth Sigils, even though they are both bronze. 3 Magic Illusionist, even with the nerf, still quite a good card. Not quite as good, but I would still say quite solid. Golem Assault, probably used in majority of decks now. Golem Assault both in spell boosting decks and in Earthright decks, just because it's such a versatile card. Giving you 2 spells and Earthright effects is absolutely crazy. Plus the fact that you can actually just restock your entire hand with wards really helps you out. Other than that, they did include Wild Golem, which I think is a little bit of a weird one. I mean, I don't personally think it's that great, but it is only a 2-of, so I think that's fine. And then probably one of the other cards that are the most value-orientated cards in Rune right now, Master Mage Levi. 3 damage to the enemy, Earthright, 3 damage to all enemies instead. I think this is what made Earthright decks so solid. It was a great AoE effect, it was a great burn effect. Really, it was just all around a great card, and surprisingly perfect for Dirt Rune. So overall, with those golds, you've got 6 golds that are worth basically what they are. 2 legendaries that I think are both also worth what they are, and then the bronze and silvers, which as a beginner I think is a nice way to stack your deck up. Consecrations, quite popular as well. Enough Earth Sigils to really make you happy. Good healing. Halo Golems. Basically, you could almost build a full Earth Rune deck just from this pre-built alone. You would probably have to get a couple more Oz, but outside of that, I think you could almost build the entire deck straight from this pre-built deck. The next pre-built is Dragon. So Dragon, I'm a little iffy on personally. While it has some okay cards in it, I think the way that they've done this is really awkward. They've included Staircase, which now really isn't that great. When it was a 1 cost, it was an amazing card, really probably quite broken, which is why it was changed. But it's a neutral card, so you're getting a neutral card in Dragon, which in some ways I can see being okay, because it means you can use this gold in other crafts, excluding Dragon. So even if you buy this pre-built, you do have the use for this gold in particular in other crafts. Same thing with Hellblindi, another card that's a little weird being a neutral. I think it's mainly because they want to push that neutral synergy with Dragon here, very, very clearly. So they are only running 2 of that as well, so there's just 4 of your golds right away. Then they have a Val's Strike, a card that I don't really see having any play at all, and I don't think it's going to see much play anyway. Not really worth it in the golds department. Star Phoenix is good, but most people will run it as either a 1 of or 2 of, so while this is okay, I think you may end up with just too many of it in general. Other than that, the the silver and bronze cards are all pretty average. I don't really like any of them. If this was the old Lightning Blast that used to banish your entire enemy board, this thing would be crazy value, but everything else I think is pretty average. Other than that, the legendaries, Prime Dragon Keeper, I think that's going to be an amazing card going forward, especially with Dragon losing a lot to rotation, so I think that's worth it in this deck. But Queen of the Dreadsea, with losing most of the big hitters, I don't think this is going to be worth it. While it might be worth it right now, in a couple months time, if you are a new player, I don't think Queen of the Dreadsea is quite going to be worth it, not unless they introduce a lot more cards that can really add support to this one. So overall, Dragon really doesn't impress me with their structure deck or pre-built deck, whatever we want to call them from now anyway. Really just not that impressive. Prime Dragon Keeper is probably the best card in the entire deck. I mean, it's nice to have a little bit of versatility with Staircase and Hellblindi being able to go into other crafts, but the rest is just pretty much filler and really not that impressive as a deck. So really disappointed with how Dragon was given this kind of deck. I suppose it's because Dragon has been so strong and they needed to, you know, not allow everyone just to go straight into Dragon really easily. The next one is Shadow. So Shadow is another one that really just doesn't have the value that it needed. So it's got good golds. I mean, Peacock, I never tried to pronounce his name, so we'll just call him Peacock. Amazing value, 3 of him, perfect. Ceres, again, amazing value, 3 of, can't go wrong. Even Black Swan here, 2 of, basically what you're going to run in any kind of Shadow deck. You're only really going to need 2, so I think that's good value. What really lets this deck down is the 2 legendaries. So they've included Twilight Queen, a legendary that's seen almost 0 competitive play, almost 0 ladder play, at least from my experiences and a few other people's experiences, and Mail of Obliteration that has basically no decent support and really doesn't do much of anything. So, while this thing has an amazing art and entrance into the game, it just doesn't have any real value to it. So you've got 2 legendaries that are practically useless in this deck. Outside of that, you've got the Silver and Bronze, which I think are fine. I mean, you've got 3 Demon Eaters, 3 Belinus, you've got 3 Zombie Parties, Catacomb. That's basically it for the Bronze and Silvers that are really good and played in pretty much every single Shadow deck. Overall though, gotta say I'm just a little disappointed with the legendaries. I think if this deck was 500, you could definitely get away with it being value, but the legendaries just let this down so much. So the next one is Blood. Blood has been let down this expansion fairly heavily. We haven't seen much in the way of decent Blood support. It lost a lot of its aggro and control cards and has really been left as a shell of itself this expansion. While it's had some success in some forms, it's just really not up there with what other decks have been around. So it's kind of disappointing, but this pre-built deck really doesn't bring us much extra value either. Trial of the Gorgons I don't think is that great, although it does work pretty nicely with Venomfang Medusa. The Sethos, or Sethon, again, another card that really works with Medusa on its own, I don't think is that great, and the Medusa package right now isn't that good. Hopefully we could get some form of Medusa support in the next expansion. I would love to see that happen, although I don't think it will. That would be amazing. If we do, then this deck could go from being a low deck to being a really good pre-built deck, but can't say for sure yet. So if you were even considering buying this Blood deck as a new player, I would definitely think about it a little more before going head diving into it, especially since Spawn of the Abyss, while a good card, doesn't see that much play in normal play. It really only gets ran in neutral blood. Outside of that, you're not running it in Vengeance. You probably wouldn't run it in an aggro deck at all. You could run it in control blood. I used to see that quite frequently, although unless we see a lot of control support, I don't think that's going to happen again. And Venom Fang Medusa herself is a good card, but really awkward, just because you've got to manage to get it to all go off, and that's not an easy feat to do. So like I said, unless we see extra support, I don't think she's going to have much worth. The best card in this deck, I think, is Demonic Officer. 3 of, ran in most blood decks from aggro right through to control, just because it's so versatile. It has Storm, it can deal with amulets, it can deal with big followers. It's pretty good overall for that. Everything else is either standard or just not worth it. Actually, I think most of it is pretty worth it. Just some things are really awkward. So if we see Serpent support in the next expansion, I recommend buying this if it turns out to be good Serpent support. Otherwise, I think passing on the Blood deck would probably be the best thing you could do. And the final pre-built deck for all of the Wonderland Dreams and Starforged Legends pre-built decks is Haven. This deck is probably closest to one of the most value-orientated decks in this entire pre-built set. This is easily on par with the Rune deck. Actually, I would pretty much put it above the Rune deck at this point. So, 3 globes, amazing card. Not much to say about it. If you know what globe does, pulling amulets to your hand works amazingly in most decks. Whether it's a 2 or 3 of, that's debatable, but personally, 3 of every time. Red Brand Knight may not be that great, but you know, it's not bad either. Blocking the damage, especially against something say like Dragon or other Haven decks, works out pretty nicely. Princess Snow White, phenomenal card, even though it was nerfed at one point there, so its evolve stat is only, you know, 2 defense instead of 3. Still a great card, can't fault it at all, comboing with turtles, which are amazing. I think this card is perfect for this deck, and don't really see a problem with having it be the main card of this one. Then, other than that, the silvers aren't looking too impressive. They're all pretty normal, although March Hare's Tea Time is, was and probably still is pretty amazing. Black Inscriptions and stuff, I believe, are still all basics, so they're not really anything to write home about. And other than that, we have 3 Taurus the Great. So this card isn't bad, but I wouldn't say it's good either. I would say it's average, and a good average at that. So it is Storm, so it is a instant 5 damage. It does work well with Aether, the other legendary in this, which is a crazy value because Aether is an amazing card, especially when comboed with Aegis. And if you are a new player, you could pick up this deck and the Aegis structure deck, and you've got not quite half the legendaries you would need. I would say you'd at least be a third of the way to all the legendaries that you would need to build a decent Haven deck, even though Haven is the most expensive deck at the moment to build for any kind of play, really. So if you are a new player, definitely take into consideration this Haven deck. While it's got some great cards, the other cards you need to build the deck are expensive, and it is definitely something to be careful of. So if you're a veteran player and you don't have these cards for Haven, which, I mean, if you are a veteran player, you probably do, but if you don't, this is great value. As a new player, I'd probably go more for the Rune deck, just because it's easier to build the other cards that are needed in it, because the only real legendary in the Rune deck is Oz. So you craft a couple more Oz, or pull them, and then you basically have a full Earthright deck ready to go. This deck, on the other hand, you're going to need, you know, another 3 legendaries for the the Beacon of Salvation. Then you're going to need at least another 2 Aether White Wings. You're going to need an Aegis, which you can get from the other pre-built. A couple more Snow White. You know, it needs a lot more legendaries for this deck to be good. But in saying that, this is still at least on top of the top pile for value. Value for your money, that is. So, really, really impressed by this deck in particular. So, an overall view of these decks, I would say, you know, for 800 crystals, most of them may not be worth it. I can see why Cygames has gone down this path, and I hope I explained that pretty well at the start of the video as to why they would do the 1 purchase limit, 800 crystals, and change up how the decks work. Overall, I think, you know, they've got some value. They're definitely not the worst things in the world. The Rune one and the Haven one especially have the most value out of every single deck here. Although Blood and probably Sword maybe and Forest all have great potential, especially with the next expansion coming in. Sword seems to be leaning towards a more mid to control range stuff, so I think some of the cards in the Sword deck could be okay. The Dazzling Stars I think is still great, especially if we do lean towards a more control elephant kind of forest deck. Both the legendaries then would be quite valuable. And a similar thing with Blood. If we see some more support for Serpents, that deck would be really good value. Otherwise, I would definitely stay clear of Dragon, Shadow, and really they're the main two that you shouldn't buy. Should definitely not buy unless you are specifically after the sleeves, which are every single card featured on these boxes are the sleeves for those decks. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I hope you had fun. I know I had fun making this kind of video. Talking about stuff is always great fun, so hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.